Imagine waking up to the sound of bulldozers tearing through your front yard, shattering decades of peace, flattening fields that have fed generations. Just feet from your front door, a highway begins to take shape. The HOA president watches from her SUV, smirking as your property value craters overnight. But what these power-drunk board members never considered is that blood runs deeper than any bylaw. Would you risk everything to defend what's rightfully yours? Jon Miller stood on the porch of the farmhouse that had been his family for 4 generations, surveying the 120 acres of land that stretched before him. At 58, the weathered lines around his eyes spoke of early mornings, late harvests, and a life built on hard work. This wasn't just land. It was his history, his retirement, and the legacy he planned to leave to his children. The old oak trees lining the driveway had stood sentinel through countless seasons, silently witnessing weddings, births, and funerals. His late wife, Catherine, had planted the flower garden along the front fence, vivid blue hydrangeas that matched her eyes. Every inch of this property held memories you couldn't put a price tag on. In Riverdale County, Jon was a pillar of the community. His quiet wisdom and unshakable integrity earned him respect across generations. Newcomers quickly learned that Jon was often the first to welcome them, with a handshake and a basket of tomatoes or sweet corn from his fields. His word was his bond, a rarity in the modern world. Everything began to shift when Victoria Chambers became president of the Riverdale Estates Homeowners Association 3 months ago. With her designer suits and polished corporate smile, Victoria seemed like an alien transplant in the rural community. Yet her presentation slick, filled with talk of property value optimization and community enhancement initiatives, won over residents eager to cash in on rising market prices. But Jon noticed the changes. Unannounced surveyors working at odd hours, closed-door meetings to which he wasn't invited, zoning commission hearings scheduled during the workday when most couldn't attend. Something felt wrong. He couldn't say exactly what, but his gut told him this was more than just procedural updates. At the last HOA meeting, Victoria assured everyone that the changes were minor, nothing that would affect current homeowners. But as she said it, her eyes flicked toward Jon's land, and a cold knot formed in his stomach. He had no idea how close the storm was, or that the brother he hadn't spoken to in years, Thomas, would soon become his fiercest ally. That April evening, the community center was more crowded than usual for the monthly HOA meeting. Jon found a seat in the back, nodding at his neighbors, Ted and Martha Williams. Victoria stood at the podium, radiating confidence in a sharp red blazer. Next on the agenda is our Community Improvement Initiative, she announced, clicking through a PowerPoint presentation filled with maps and jargon. We're pleased to unveil a new transportation infrastructure development to enhance accessibility and modernize our community profile. Jon squinted at the slides, diagrams, zoning overlays, obscure acronyms, something about traffic optimization and commercial integration. When the Q&A session opened, he raised his hand. Ms. Chambers, some of these roads seem to cut through existing properties. Can you clarify whose land is affected? Victoria's smile froze slightly. All development is within HOA common areas and designated easements, Mr. Miller. These plans were in the March newsletter appendix for those who reviewed it. Before he could ask a follow-up, she pivoted to the next question. After the meeting, Jon pulled aside Doug Peterson, a longtime board member and old acquaintance. Doug, something's not adding up. Can I see the full plans for this road project? Doug looked uneasy. Victoria's handling all the documentation now. New protocol for efficiency. He leaned in, voice low. Just let it go, Jon. There are big players involved. Jon didn't let it go. The next morning, he and Ted pored over past meeting records in Ted's garage. Their first breakthrough came when they discovered that just 3 months earlier, the HOA had quietly changed its voting rules, lowering the approval threshold for major developments from 75% to a simple majority. That's not right, Ted muttered. Nobody even knew. 3 days later, Jon saw survey crews marking the edge of his land. When he approached, they told him they were updating county records. You're 15 feet into my property line, Jon said. The foreman didn't flinch. We're working off official HOA boundary documents, sir. Any disputes must go through proper channels. Emails to the board went unanswered. The township zoning office denied any new filings. At the county records office, he was told the relevant files were under review and temporarily unavailable. Jon's battle had just begun. The breakthrough came on a quiet Friday evening, unexpected but undeniable. Jon's phone buzzed. It was Jim Parker, an old high school friend who now worked in City Hall. "Jon," Jim said, voice low, "I shouldn't be telling you this, but they fast-tracked approval for a connector highway, north end of Riverdale. It cuts right to the front of your property." Jon's breath caught. "What are you talking about?" "That's my land." Jim hesitated. "On paper, it's listed as HOA common land, not private." "Something's off, Jon." He drove home with the last light of the day stretching shadows across his fields. As he turned into gravel drive, the old oaks waved gently in the breeze, sentinels of a simpler past. He couldn't picture them replaced by exhaust fumes and asphalt. Catherine's hydrangeas would be trampled under concrete. His porch would stare directly at a 4-lane corridor of noise. He parked, and that's when he saw it. An envelope, official-looking, wedged under his door. Inside was a formal notice from the Riverdale Estates HOA, an administrative boundary adjustment, dated 3 months prior. According to this document, the front 2 acres of his property, land he had always known as his, now belonged to the HOA. The storm had arrived. Tuesday night's emergency HOA meeting was packed. Concerned homeowners filled the community center to the walls, a low buzz of anxious conversation filling the air. Jon came prepared. He had spent the previous day digging into Victoria Chambers' past. What he found chilled him. Before coming to Riverdale, Victoria had worked as an executive consultant for Greenfield Developments, the same company now contracted to build the shopping complex the new highway would connect to. Victoria opened the meeting with her usual poise. Behind her, projected on a screen, was a vibrant digital rendering labeled Riverdale Commercial Corridor. It showed a 4-lane highway slicing directly through the front of Jon's farmland. "As you can see," Victoria said, gesturing to the display, "this corridor represents a major leap forward in our community infrastructure. Traffic studies predict a 400% increase in commercial visibility, substantial gains in property value for homes near the new development." She spoke in polished jargon. Traffic flow optimization, commercial tax revenue, projected appreciation percentages. It all sounded impressive, purposefully confusing. When she finally opened the floor for questions, Jon stood. "I've owned my property since 1987, he said evenly. "That highway cuts right through it. I've never sold it, never signed it over." Victoria's smile remained, but her tone turned clipped. "Mr. Miller, if you refer to the HOA boundary adjustment filed in January, you'll see that the area in question falls within the original community easement lines from the 1970s. Your deed reflects an administrative error, one we've now corrected." Jon's voice stayed calm. "An error that stood unnoticed for over 40 years and just happened to be discovered 3 months after you became HOA president." The room stirred, murmurs growing louder. Victoria's expression cooled. The board acted within its authority to resolve historic discrepancies. This project has been reviewed and approved at every level. Permits are secured. Contract signed. Construction begins next week. Jon didn't flinch. He opened a folder. "I've reviewed every HOA covenant dating back to the 1970s, when this land was first partially developed. There is no clause granting the HOA the power to redraw property boundaries without notice or owner consent." Several neighbors nodded. Martha Williams raised her hand. "Victoria, we never voted on taking Jon's land. That can't be legal." For the first time, cracks formed in the facade. Jon felt it, a subtle shift. People were starting to question. Victoria, unfazed, responded coldly. "Progress doesn't wait for sentiment, Mr. Miller. Riverdale is evolving, and this board has acted according to the amended bylaws ratified last quarter. Amendments none of us knew about." Ted Williams shouted. Victoria motioned to security. "Mr. Williams is being disruptive." 2 guards escorted Ted from the building. His departure sparked chaos. Residents shouted over one another. Victoria quickly banged the gavel and adjourned the meeting. In the parking lot, several neighbors approached Jon. "We didn't know they were taking your land," said Alina Hayes, a longtime Riverdale resident. "This isn't right." Back home, Jon spent hours examining the documents Victoria had cited. The so-called boundary adjustment was buried in a 173-page HOA filing, a document dump few residents ever read. He noticed something odd. The surveyor's signature on the adjustment looked different from previous filings. Sloppy, almost forged. An environmental impact report? It was full of holes. Literally, it failed to mention that the highway would cut through protected wetlands on the northern edge of his property. Worse, it would bring heavy traffic within feet as well, potentially contaminating his water supply. Jon leaned back in his chair, heart pounding, staring at the evidence spread across his kitchen table. This wasn't just bureaucracy. This was a land grab, and he was done playing by their rules. Contamination from road runoff. Noise pollution so intense it would make the front rooms unlivable. But that wasn't the worst of it. Jon's stomach turned as he read the results of a recent Freedom of Information request. Victoria Chambers had purchased 3 commercial lots just outside the proposed shopping district through a shell company just days after she became HOA president. Each lot, currently valued around $400,000, was projected to be worth over $3 million once the highway brought direct access. Her personal financial gain from the development was undeniable, and it had never been disclosed to the community. Jon compiled everything: purchase records, timeline overlays, and a side-by-side of her public statements. He sent it all to the HOA board with demand for an emergency meeting. Their response came swiftly and with venom. A cease-and-desist letter from the HOA's attorney accused him of defamation and warned him that the project's timeline was legally locked in. The letter made it clear, keep pushing, and he'd face serious consequences. Now the betrayal wasn't just suspected. It was confirmed. Victoria's corruption was no longer a theory. But Jon understood the stakes. He wasn't just facing a hostile HOA. He was going up against developers, lawyers, and political strings pulled behind closed doors. He needed help. Real help. Jon almost canceled his annual fishing trip. Every year, he and his high school buddies retreated to Lake Simmons, a ritual that helped him stay grounded. But Ted wouldn't hear of him skipping. "You need this, man," Ted said. "Clear your head. We'll figure this out when you get back. Go catch some base and breathe." Reluctantly, Jon left early Friday morning for the lake, 3 hours north. The trip brought brief peace. No cell service, no emails, no HOA. Just mist on the water, the quiet tug of a fishing line, and memories of simpler times. But the moment he returned on Sunday afternoon, the illusion shattered. He pulled into his driveway and stopped cold. The 100-year-old oak trees that had lined his entrance for generations, gone. Nothing but jagged stumps and tire tracks. Heavy machinery had torn through the front field. Catherine's memorial garden had been bulldozed to rubble. Her beloved blue hydrangeas lay buried beneath piles of earth. Jon sat in his truck, knuckles white on the steering wheel, as grief and fury collided in his chest. Through blurred vision, he saw it, a single blue flower, poking defiantly through the wreckage. One of Catherine's hydrangeas had survived. With shaking hands, he knelt and gently picked it, placing it in a jar of water back inside. That single act, preserving what little remained, felt like a quiet declaration of war. Outside, engines still roared. Crews were operating on a Sunday. Jon stormed up to the foreman, a stocky man holding a clipboard. "Who authorized this?" Jon demanded. "You weren't supposed to start construction yet. The permits aren't final." The man blinked. "Sir, we have all the approvals." HOA president delivered the final documentation Friday afternoon. Said everything was fast-tracked. "You've destroyed protected wetlands," Jon snapped. "The environmental report isn't even complete." The foreman shrugged. "Not my department. I just follow the orders." Back at the house, Jon found another mess. His water line had been severed, an accidental hit, according to a sheepish crew member who pointed to a mismarked utility map. His cattle had no access to drinking water. Repairs were scheduled for later in the week. The destruction wasn't just careless. It was strategic. Jon paced his kitchen, the rescued flour resting on the counter like a beacon. His voicemail was full, neighbors leaving messages of shock and support. One name stood out, Sarah Jenkins, a local reporter. She called 3 times. He called her back. "Can you come out today?" he asked. Sarah arrived that evening with a camera and notebook. She photographed the fallen trees, the mangled garden, the equipment still humming on sacred soil. She promised her editor would run the story first thing Monday. Jon knew it was a small step, but it mattered. He needed eyes on what was happening. Pressure. Witnesses. Still, it wouldn't be enough. That night, as the sky darkened, Jon made a call he had avoided for 5 years. The phone rang once. Twice. Then a familiar voice answered. "This is Thomas." Jon hesitated. "It's me," he said. "It's Jon." A long silence followed. "I wouldn't call if it wasn't important," Jon said. "I need your help." They hadn't spoken since their father's funeral, when harsh words over the family business had shattered their bond. Thomas had moved to the state capital, carved out a career in government, and disappeared from Jon's life. Their father's last wish, that his sons reconcile, had remained unmet. Until now. "What's going on?" Thomas asked, cautious, but listening. Jon's voice cracked as he explained what had happened. The trees, the garden, Catherine's hydrangeas, their grandfather's land, all of it under threat. "They're tearing it all apart, Tom," he said. "Everything Dad and Grandpa built." There was silence. Then Thomas said, "Send me the photos. Send everything. I'll be there tomorrow morning." At 8:17 the next morning, a black government-issued SUV pulled into the drive. The brothers stood awkwardly for a long moment. Then Thomas stepped forward and embraced him. 5 years of silence collapsed in the shadow of their shared loss. "I couldn't believe the pictures," Thomas said, surveying the wreckage. "They think they can just take this?" Jon didn't answer. He didn't need to, because now, for the first time since this began, he wasn't alone. Seeing the damage in person was different. Thomas had reviewed the photos, read the documents. But now, standing where the old oak trees once stood, a professional detachment cracked. "Thanks for coming," Jon said simply. The brothers walked the property line in silence. Jon pointed out boundary markers that had been moved or gone missing entirely. Thomas took photos, made notes, his trained eye catching inconsistencies Jon had overlooked. "You said the HOA president is Victoria Chambers?" Thomas asked, flipping a page in his notebook. Jon nodded. "You know her?" "Not personally," Thomas said, his tone hardening. "But her name crossed my desk. There were irregularities with a project in Lakeside County last year. Nothing stuck, but something fell off." He hesitated. "Jon, I need to tell you something. I'm not just with the State Environmental Office anymore. I've been serving on the State Land Commission for the past 3 years. Jon stopped walking. "The Land Commission? You mean the one with final say over large-scale development?" Thomas nodded. "I didn't tell you sooner because, well, we weren't exactly talking. But this changes everything. Let me see everything you've got." For the next 3 hours, they worked side by side at Jon's kitchen table, Catherine's salvaged hydrangea watching over them. Thomas quickly spotted serious violations. Permits filed with false information, environmental assessments with glaring omissions, and survey maps that flat out lied. "This survey is bogus," Thomas said, pointing. "Elevation markers are wrong. They don't match the USGS baseline. And this environmental impact report completely omits required wetlands analysis." They were knee-deep in violations when a knock broke their focus. Jon opened the door to find Ted Williams flanked by 3 other concerned neighbors. "Construction crews are rolling in heavy," Ted said. "They've got equipment staging now. Word is road work starts full force tomorrow morning." He noticed Thomas. "Who's this?" "My brother," Jon replied. "And he's here to help us fight back." With urgency now boiling over, Thomas outlined a strategy. "I'm initiating emergency proceedings with the Land Commission," he said. "If we move fast, we can freeze construction with a stop work order by morning." He turned to Jon. "You need to document everything. Take videos, photos, get statements from neighbors. Over the next few hours, The community transformed into a rapid response team, with Thomas guiding them. They collected footage of the heavy machinery, photographed outdated or forged permit documents taped to fences, and canvassed the neighborhood for statements. Many residents had never received legal notice of the development. Another violation. Thomas called in a favor from a surveyor friend who performed an independent boundary check. The results were damning. The HOA survey had deliberately moved the property line. By mid-afternoon, Thomas had filed emergency paperwork with the Land Commission. The result: an immediate 24-hour construction freeze. When Jon relayed the order to the site manager, the man went pale. He made a panic phone call. 30 minutes later, a black Mercedes roared into Jon's drive. Victoria Chambers stepped out in designer heels, face flushed with fury. She stormed up the gravel path like she owned it. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she barked. "Do you have any idea how much money this delay is costing?" Jon stood firm on his porch, arms crossed. "I'm the legal owner of this land, and you're trespassing." Victoria jabbed a manicured finger at him. "This project is happening, whether you like it or not. I've got investors lined up. You'll be personally liable for every hour of delay." Unbeknownst to her, Jon's security camera was recording every word, including her confession of personal investments tied to the timeline. It would become a critical piece of evidence. "You've messed with the wrong family this time," Jon said, his voice low. She sneered. "You're just a farmer clinging to a pile of dirt. I have attorneys, politicians, and capital behind me. This isn't some sentimental drama. It's business. You might want to check who you're threatening," came Thomas's voice from behind Jon. He stepped forward, flipping open his badge. Thomas Miller, State Land Commission. Victoria's face drained of color. She backed toward her car, heels catching the gravel, and without another word, slammed the door and tore down the drive, tires spinning. Inside, Thomas's phone buzzed. "It's my contact," he said, answering. A pause, then a nod. "Stop work order's been approved. Enforcement officers are en route to serve it." Jon exhaled, shoulders dropping for the first time in days. It was a major victory. The bulldozers would fall silent, at least for now. But neither brother believed Victoria would walk away quietly. What they didn't know was how fast the story was spreading. Neighbors had begun uploading photos of the bulldozed garden, the downed trees, and Jon standing his ground. A short video of Victoria's outburst, clipped from security footage, was already making the rounds. By nightfall, local news vans lined the road, and across 3 counties, #SaveMiller was trending. Then came the final blow. A leaked computer rendering, created by the construction company, began circulating online. It showed the future development. A massive 4-lane highway running, just feet from Jon's front porch, Catherine's flower bed now a shadow under concrete. It was identical to the confrontation scene where Victoria had stood, shouting about profit and control. The peaceful image of a farmhouse, split in 2 by looming infrastructure, had become a symbol of unchecked power, of greed, and of a farmer who refused to back down. Dawn broke over Miller Farm not with a grinding roar of bulldozers, but with a quiet rustle of clipboard pages and the low murmur of state officials. Instead of construction crews, inspectors in official environmental jackets spread across the land, carefully documenting wetland boundaries, taking soil samples and photographing potential violations. The emergency stop work order had done more than halt machines. It had triggered a full-scale review of every permit clearance and environmental impact statement associated with the project. Thomas had arranged for Roland Pierce, the county's most respected and neutral land surveyor, to conduct a comprehensive boundary assessment. By mid-morning, Roland's findings confirmed what Jon and Thomas had long suspected. "These HOA documents," Roland said, tapping his chart, "are professionally fraudulent. They manipulated elevation data and ignored historical markers that date back over 100 years. He looked at Jon gravely. "In my professional opinion, this isn't a clerical error. It's deliberate misrepresentation." The evidence was already damning. But what came next shattered Victoria Chambers' carefully constructed image of legitimacy. Jon's phone rang. It was HOA board member Elaine Winters. Her voice was trembling. "I've been up all night thinking about this," she said. "Check your email." Victoria must have copied me by mistake on a thread meant for the developers. The forwarded email chain was explosive. Victoria's shell company, VC Investment Partners, had quietly purchased 3 commercial lots adjacent to the planned highway, well below market value. The emails outlined a backdoor agreement to resell those lots at massive profit once the road increased their value. Worse, the messages discussed discretionary compensation packages for board members who supported the project. Clear evidence of illegal kickbacks. "I never took a dime," Elaine insisted. "I only voted yes because she said it would increase all our property values. I had no idea it involved stealing your land." By noon, Jon had organized a community meeting in the barn. Nearly 60 neighbors showed up, many bringing food, coffee, and folding chairs, an impromptu town hall under the wooden beams of the old family structure. Using the barn's back wall as a makeshift projection screen, Thomas presented the evidence. The falsified surveys, missing wetlands analysis, manipulated permits, and, most damning of all, the emails. "This isn't just about my brother's farm," Thomas told the group. "This is about a systemic abuse of power affecting every homeowner in Riverdale Estates." The mood shifted palpably from confusion to outrage. Local TV reporter Sarah Jenkins arrived mid-meeting, her camera crew capturing raw interviews from neighbors who felt blindsided. "I voted for this because they said it was just unused HOA land," Ted Williams told the camera. "I never would have agreed to stealing my neighbor's property." The media exposure marked another turning point. Now under the public spotlight, local officials and politicians who had quietly supported the project began distancing themselves. The pressure was mounting, but Victoria Chambers wasn't done yet. That afternoon, Thomas received a carefully worded text from an unknown number. "I believe we may be able to find a mutually beneficial resolution. Discretion required. Let's talk." Suspecting an attempted bribe, Thomas reported the message to the Ethics Commission and was authorized to wear a wire. At a quiet coffee shop near the courthouse, Victoria arrived in full charm mode, acting as if nothing unusual had happened. "You're clearly a very capable man," she said, sliding a business card across the table. "My group, VC Investment Partners, is expanding. We could use someone like you to help us navigate red tape." Her voice dropped slightly. $50,000 up front. Discreet. All we need is for certain regulatory obstacles to quietly resolve themselves. Thomas leaned back, calmly sipping his coffee. "Are you offering me a bribe to ignore permit violations?" Victoria's laugh was thin and nervous. "No, of course not. This is a business opportunity. A consulting arrangement between professionals. No one needs to know." The wire captured every word. The conversation provided irrefutable evidence of criminal intent, not mere administrative error. Meanwhile, back at the farm, Jon faced a confrontation of his own. A convoy of construction vehicles returned, drivers claiming they had received verbal clearance from unnamed county officials to resume work. Bulldozers rolled forward, ignoring the posted stop work signs. Jon and a small group of neighbors stepped into their path. "You'll have to physically remove us from this land," Jon said calmly, arms folded. The standoff was recorded from multiple angles by cell phones. Then the police arrived. 2 cruisers pulled into the driveway, lights flashing. The foreman smirked, assuming backup had arrived. Instead, Officers Martinez and Wilson approached Jon. "We're here to enforce the stop work order issued by the State Land Commission," Martinez said. "All construction equipment must be removed from the premises immediately." The foreman's face fell. The crowd erupted in cheers. That moment, caught on video, spread across social media within hours. It showed a simple man, standing firm against corporate machines, flanked by neighbors and upheld by law. As dusk fell, the construction crews withdrew, leaving behind half-built access roads and piles of unused material, monuments to a corrupt project temporarily frozen in time. That evening, Thomas received a call from the State Land Commission. "We've reviewed your submission," the commissioner said. "Based on severity of these violations and the new evidence, we're scheduling an emergency hearing." The hearing would be public, and it was only a week away. For the first time since the fight began, Jon Miller allowed himself to believe they might actually win. But even as hope stirred, a new battle was quietly unfolding. That evening, under fluorescent lights and frayed banners, Victoria Chambers convened an emergency HOA board meeting at the Riverdale Estates Community Center. Her goal was simple: seize back control before it slipped entirely from her hands. Instead, she walked into a firestorm. The center was packed beyond capacity. Every seat taken, residents lining the walls and crowding the hallway outside. People weren't just attending, they were witnessing. And they had come with questions, suspicions, and fury. Victoria tapped her gavel, attempting to project calm. "We're facing some temporary regulatory delays with our community improvement project," she began. "I prepared a statement to address concerns and outline our path forward." She barely got through the first sentence. "Madam President," Board member Doug Peterson interrupted, voice firm, "I move that we first address the allegations of misconduct that have been raised." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Those unsubstantiated rumors aren't on tonight's agenda." A voice rang out from the back of the room. "They are now." Thomas Miller stood, holding a thick folder. "I'm Thomas Miller, Deputy Director of the State Land Commission. I've been authorized to present preliminary findings from our investigation. I'll take 20 minutes of the board's time and the community's." He walked to the front and placed the folder on the table with deliberate finality. For the next 20 minutes, Thomas laid out the full scope of the corruption: fraudulent boundary surveys, environmental permit violations, undisclosed conflicts of interest, evidence of financial kickbacks, and, most damning, a recorded attempt to bribe a state official. "The commission has suspended all permits pending criminal investigation," Thomas concluded, "and the state attorney's office is now reviewing potential charges, including mail fraud, wire fraud, and corruption of public officials." The room fell silent. Then Victoria cracked. "These are baseless accusations," she snapped, jabbing a finger toward Jon. "This is his brother's property. Of course he's biased." "I recuse myself from all commission votes involving Riverdale Estates," Thomas replied evenly. "The decisions were unanimous, based on expert findings and verified documentation." Board member Elaine Winters stood, her hands shaking. "I need to come clean. Victoria told us the road would raise property values. She never disclosed she owned land next to the development, and she never told us she was taking Jon Miller's farm without proper compensation." Another board member spoke up. "I was told all proper procedures have been followed," Doug muttered, now looking down at the table. "I never would have voted for this otherwise." The room exploded into noise, shouted questions, angry accusations, neighbors demanding accountability. Victoria tried to bang the gavel. "This meeting is adjourned." "No, it's not," Ted Williams called out, standing tall. "As allowed by our bylaws, I'm calling for an emergency vote of no confidence in the board leadership." He raised his hand. "All those in favor of removing Victoria Chambers as HOA president, raise your hands." A sea of hands went up. Some residents stood on chairs to make sure they were seen. "You can't do this." Victoria sputtered. "This isn't procedurally correct." Jon rose, calm and resolute. "Actually, the bylaws you so often hide behind allow for the emergency removal of officers for cause. Page 37. You might want to read it." Staggered, Victoria gathered her papers and fled the podium to scatter boos, only to find 2 sheriff's deputies waiting for her in the parking lot. "We'd like to ask you some questions regarding the State Commission's criminal referral," one said as cameras clicked and murmurs spread. Back inside, the meeting continued without her. Ted Williams was voted interim chair. One by one, neighbors approached Jon with apologies. "We should have questioned things more," Martha Williams said quietly. "We just assumed the HOA was looking out for us." Jon's response was simple and spoke volumes. "This isn't about blame. It's about protecting our community from those who would exploit it and rebuilding trust together." The most emotional moment came when elderly resident Frank Harmon stepped to the microphone. "My family's lived here 60 years. Jon's father helped us during hard times. Twice. And when I think about what they tried to do to his land," Frank's voice broke. "I'm ashamed we almost let it happen. As the meeting drew to a close, the community took bold steps forward. Victoria and her allied board members were permanently removed. A full review of all HOA decisions from the past 6 months was approved. New conflict of interest disclosure rules were adopted. A residents' committee was formed to develop alternative, ethical improvements that respected private property rights. Then came the final bombshell. County records examiner Diane Lopez stepped to the microphone. My office has completed its review of Ms. Chambers' residency filings. She never established legal residency in Riverdale Estates. The property she listed is leased out. She was never eligible to serve on the HOA board in the first place. A stunned hush filled the room. Then, from the back, a deep voice broke the silence. As a 20-year resident and county judge, I think I speak for many when I say this community just reclaimed its soul. Judge Raymond Harris stepped forward, not in robes, but in jeans and a flannel shirt. He smiled at John and Thomas. You boys did what many wouldn't dare. You stood your ground. And because of that, Riverdale stand with you now. Applause thundered through the room. Judge Raymond Harris rose from his seat at the front of the packed community center. As the judge presiding over the emergency injunction, he announced, I've reviewed the evidence thoroughly. I am hereby ordering the full restoration of Mr. Miller's property at the HOA's expense. The room erupted in applause. John remained still for a moment, stunned, then bowed his head as the weight of it all sank in. The legacy of his family was safe. 6 months later, Miller Farm had changed once more, this time as a symbol of renewal and unity. Where bulldozers had once torn through the soil, new life had taken root. Young saplings lined the pathways, each bearing a small plaque with the name of the neighbor who had donated it. The most heartfelt restoration was that of Catherine's garden. Once nearly destroyed, it had been lovingly expanded into a peaceful memorial space where neighbors could honor their own loved ones. The single hydrangea John had salvaged during the chaos had been propagated. Its blue blooms now spread throughout the garden like a living testament to resilience. Justice had moved swiftly, faced with overwhelming evidence. Victoria Chambers' developer allies quickly turned state's evidence in exchange for lighter sentences. Victoria herself was charged with multiple felonies, including wire fraud, mail fraud, falsification of public documents, and attempted bribery of a state official. Crimes that carried a potential 30-year prison term. Her trial was set for the coming month, with legal analysts predicting it will become a landmark case in HOA law. The fallout had reached even further. Inspired by the scandal, state lawmakers passed a series of reforms dubbed the Miller Rule, mandating transparency in all HOA dealings and requiring explicit homeowner notification for any property boundary changes. On a crisp October afternoon, the community gathered at Miller Farm to celebrate. Potluck tables stretched along the newly restored driveway. Children ran through fields that had once been marked for pavement. Local officials mingled with residents, many of whom wore buttons that read, Community over corruption. John, ever modest, was visibly uncomfortable being the center of attention. When asked to speak, he kept it simple. This land isn't just dirt and grass, he said, gazing out across the horizon. It's our story, our past, our present, and what we choose to protect for the future. This wasn't just about defending my rights. It was about standing up for honesty, transparency, and mutual respect. Standing beside him, Thomas accepted an award for ethical government service. He held it up briefly, then gestured toward John. I just did my job, he said. My brother is the one who showed real courage. He stood firm when it would have been easier to give up. The event also marked the unveiling of the Miller Farm Heritage Trust, funded by a settlement from the HOA's insurance provider. The trust would ensure the land remained agricultural forever, a living monument to the victory they'd earned. Sarah Jenkins, the local journalist whose early coverage had turned public opinion, had one more announcement. Her investigative series had won a regional journalism award and triggered inquiries in neighboring counties. Because of what started here, she told the crowd, 3 other communities have uncovered similar corruption. John's stand has protected countless others. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the crowd lingered. Children asked John to retell the story of the day. He stood in front of the bulldozers. Older residents shared memories of John's father and grandfather, men known for their quiet integrity. For Jon, the greatest reward was found in the quiet moments. Sitting on his porch, watching the sunset paint the sky over fields that will remain untouched by concrete. Catherine's garden bloomed again each spring, a gentle promise kept. The community had been tested, and had chosen principle over convenience, justice over greed. As twilight fell, Jon and Thomas walked along the newly restored boundary line. Jon knelt beside a young oak sapling, planted where a century-old tree had once stood. Sometimes, he said softly, the most important boundary isn't drawn on any map or deed. It's a line you draw when someone tries to take what's rightfully yours. And when you stand your ground, you often find that family, community, and justice are standing right there with you. As they stood in the fading light, the camera panned back to reveal a new sign at the farm's entrance. Miller Farm, protected heritage property.